Welcome to another interview of a man from Malecare, a member of our support community for prostate cancer for many years. His name's Jonathan, and I'll ask him to tell us how he got diagnosed and his thoughts on trust in healthcare. And welcome.
Yeah, I get that. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Tell me, how did you get diagnosed?
I'm now 70. I was diagnosed in 18. I was on vacation at the beach and I got a call out of the blue from my primary care doctor, whom I'd recently seen for just a regular checkup, but I hadn't seen him for 4 years, which is kind of important. I 4 years prior, I'd seen him and had a PSA that I think was about 1.5. And I'd gotten rather complacent about my PSA because it had always been very low. And I say I was complacent despite the fact that my father had prostate cancer and actually had metastatic prostate cancer. He called me and told me that all my test results were fine except for my PSA, which was 11.5. And he said we ought to retest just to make sure that the result holds up. And he also said, whatever the PSA ends up being, odds are it's not prostate cancer. It could be prostatitis or any one of a number or benign prostate enlargement or other benign conditions. So I got retested and it had risen to 15 by then, at which point I made an appointment at Johns Hopkins in their very excellent prostate cancer program. And I used to be for many years a reporter at the Baltimore Sun where I covered medicine and healthcare. And I got to know Dr. Patrick Walsh, who was a very well-known urologist who had innovated the technique that's now used to remove prostates with a fairly high degree of success in preserving nerves so that sexual function and urinary control would be preserved. In any event, I saw him right away. Nobody else could see me within like 3 or 4 months. Everybody's backed up in this field. But he, because he's semi-retired, agreed to see me. And he said, "Oh, your PSA is technically 15, but it's really about 30 because you've been on finasteride, which for urinary frequency, which I didn't know that. And frankly, my primary care doctor didn't know about. And I'm not sure that many primary care doctors do. But it's an effective drug for what it's prescribed for, but it masks PSA. So if your PSA is 15, it's probably 30. So that's how I got diagnosed. I eventually had a biopsy, which was positive in many cores, and I had a Gleason score of 9, which is, I was told by Dr. Walsh, is not merely high risk, it's considered very high risk.
So let's
And
stick with this
yeah,
for a second.
yeah,
You were told by your primary care physician that not to worry, it probably is not prostate
right.
cancer, but your background in healthcare reporting drove you to Dr. Walsh, who discovered that together with
Yeah.
you that in fact it was an advanced stage of prostate cancer. What did that do to your feeling of trust in your primary care
Well,
physician?
first of all, I have to say in the primary care doctor's defense, he said the odds are it isn't prostate cancer, but we should test again.
We're
I, if I have a criticism, it's that and it's also a criticism I can direct toward myself, is that 4 years should not have gone by between physicals. And I wish he had called me in earlier than that. I also wish I had thought to go in earlier. So I guess we have shared responsibility.
So really, the idea of trust is about how frequently you should be
Yeah.
surveilled, tested, and such.
I think
Uh,
a good primary care doctor needs to be on top of your health care and to make sure that you've had the screenings you need and whatever other health care and should, be the quarterback of your health care, making, standing at the center of everything.
your background as a healthcare reporter didn't really drive you to being more vigilant about your own care.
Yeah, I have to admit it should have. Let me say it should have. But on the other hand, the news about prostate cancer and especially prostate cancer screening has been very mixed and equivocal. There are, as you know, the large body of or number of physicians who don't test for PSA, primary care doctors who don't believe that PSA is useful. And I written news stories about several actually, about the debate over prostate cancer screening. And I've talked to doctors who do and who do not test for it, people on both sides. That said, the added fact that I had a family history of prostate cancer should have driven me to get tested more frequently, and really should have driven my doctor to call me in and to stay on top of it.
Sure. So now we'll push you forward a bit in time, and you're now sitting in Dr. Walsh's office and discussing treatments. What are you thinking in terms of what your next step is?
Well, I mean, he made it pretty clear that he was just there as my not a gatekeeper, but as my entry point, and that he would work me up, order all the tests that were needed to diagnose cancer. And he also made it clear that the treatment decision would not be his, and that at Hopkins, and I hope at other academic medical institutions, the question as to what form of treatment you should receive is put before a tumor board. And they meet every week. I think it's every Friday at Hopkins, and it's made up of urologists, a medical oncologist, a radiation oncologist, and people in other disciplines whose work has to do with prostate cancer, but who come into it from different perspectives. And the idea is to get a well-rounded group of people to talk about the treatment and to come to a consensus, which I think is much better than just going to urologists and getting the urologist's recommendation. Urologists are surgeons, and they may or may not know much about hormonal treatment and radiation. And the same goes if you just saw a radiation oncologist. So I'm a big fan of the way Hopkins approaches the diagnosis and treatment recommendations. So
Is
Dr.
there a
Walsh
sen-
made it clear that that would be the next step. And he said they're probably going to recommend ADT, hormonal therapy, and radiation, but that's for them to decide and to recommend.
So let's stick with that idea around trust in healthcare, the idea of multiple clinicians sitting around a table
Yeah,
discussing your case and coming to a consensus, as opposed to one or two doctors deciding or sharing a decision with
yeah.
you. I mean, the answer might be obvious, but what gave you more feeling of trust and certainty that this is
Yeah.
the right path?
That it By approaching the treatment recommendation that way, they're trying to eliminate or at least mitigate the risk of bias, of treatment bias, that the urologist might have toward surgery or that a radiation oncologist might have toward radiation or hormonal therapy. So whatever biases are present in the room, they all kind of get meted out. And I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to see how they reached consensus and whether there was even a disagreement about the course of treatment. Although I will say that Dr. Walsh, just in taking a minute to confide in me, he's a surgeon and he's very all about surgery, but his hunch was that I would go the other route, which would be ADT and radiation. He was right. That's what they recommended.
Sure. How long ago was that?
Late in 2018.
Okay, so about 3.5 years ago at the time we're recording. Is that right? I'm not
No,
sure.
well, like 5 years ago.
5 years ago? Okay,
5 or 6, yeah, yeah.
good I asked, and that's why I didn't study math. So, and perhaps maybe I should have. Okay, so the idea of you're now 5 years out
Mhm.
looks from where you sit now, do you feel choices were made that were appropriate?
I do. I do. I should say I also got a second opinion. It was done by email and phone with a urologist a Harvard affiliated urologist who was with the Cambridge Health Alliance, whom I had been referred to by somebody I'm close to. And I sent her all the test results, the biopsy results, and she agreed with the recommendation that the
Yeah. So does healthcare in 2024 feel like it's where it should be, or that people are withholding opportunities for therapy or pushing up therapy that shouldn't be pushed? Mentioned earlier around the PSA testing is controversial. From your perspective, both as a patient and as a retired reporter and such, what are your thoughts around that?
I think an awful lot of education needs to be done around prostate cancer. I don't think the public understands it. And I don't think that a lot of patients who are going through it, at least at the early stages, really understand it. And there is a perception out there, and it's reflected a lot on the Malecare board, which I'm a huge fan of. We can talk about that too. It helped me enormously. But that the choices really boils down to you want to get surgery. It's the just get it out principle. And the people who have had that treatment and have succeeded, many of them become advocates of it. And I think that people who have been through the experience of having this disease, as well as people who are now facing it, need to understand that every patient is different and that the therapy that one patient receives and may have benefited from isn't necessarily what the next patient should receive. That it's an extremely nuanced decision and a lot of subtleties. And I think people need to know that.
So, as you were figuring out what treatments to choose, you were discussing it with doctors, but also, as you've mentioned, you're on the Malecare prostate cancer support community. How does peer-to-peer support and how does peer-to-peer conversation play into your choice making and feeling of trust in your choices?
Well, I don't think it really affects my trust in medical professionals. I really see it as a way to kind of balance out what I'm hearing from the medical community that nobody knows what it's like to go through treatment, what it's like to get to be diagnosed and to be all of a sudden confronted with the news that you have a serious chronic condition. Nobody knows what that's like or what it's like to go through treatment and to just live with the fear that this cancer might get you. Nobody knows like patients do, and doctors and nurse practitioners can sit down and prepare you, but that's just the beginning. I think you really need to hear from patients what it's like, and to just part of it is just the affirmation that what you're going that you're not alone, that what you're going through, other people have experienced. It's very helpful to hear little tricks or tips that people might offer to cope with therapy better. It just balances out the whole picture of what you're facing and the choices that you have to, not so much the choices you have to make, but how you're going to cope with life with cancer. It is, I mean, it strikes you like a bolt of lightning. I was not prepared for it, despite having written about cancer many, many times and then gone on later on to edit pieces about cancer. You can think you're an expert in it, but you're not until you've had it. So I think it's very important to hear from other people. I'll add, I think you have to take what people say with a grain of salt too, because as I said before, people often become advocates of their own treatment. And I think that's something you need to temper with a dose of reality that everybody's different and that patient's experience might not be yours.
Yeah, just like for surgeons and radiation oncologists,
Yeah.
there's treatment bias. For patients, there's experience bias.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would
So,
never just carte blanche recommend that somebody get radiation and hormone therapy. I mean, it all depends on their test results, their age, a whole number of other factors.
how have, for somebody coming to either a male care support group online or in person or anywhere else, what, aside from taking things with a grain of salt, what are your suggestions for their experience to be optimized?
Well, I think is to kind of sit back and this sort of is an expansion on the grain of salt principle, is to sit back and just read for a while and take in everybody's experiences. Don't react immediately to the post that you just read. You know, be on guard against being influenced by the last thing somebody told you. Just sit back, take it all in, and try to get an overall picture of what patients experience.
Sure.
That
And
would be my advice.
I mean, you've mentioned quite generously and lovely that you're a fan of the male care support community and have participated in it in a way that's both beneficial to you and to other members. I mean, have you had experience with other communities, and what about male care's community makes elevates it above the others?
Um, I've had experience with a few other communities, but they're for relatively minor conditions. So no other community that really is comparable to this one.
What do you think makes it special?
Well, I think one thing is that well, let me name a few things. One is the diversity of experiences that people come in with. There are people who, the Gleason sixes who are really worried about what's going to happen to them, the Gleason nines and tens, like myself, me being a nine, people on different forms of therapy, people living in different countries, people who are being influenced by sort of trendy alternative, I don't want them cures, call them cures, but therapies. And it's interesting to see all that. And also the fact that you and your partner bring expertise into the board. So if somebody touts, I can't even think of the name of them, but a trendy alternative cure, then one of you comes back with studies to show that those therapies have been shown not to be effective. So it's not just a place for people to vent, that the moderators of the board come back with facts and not just with, here's an article that presented an alternative view, but more what the sort of state of the art science is on it. And I think that is very unusual.
Yeah.
You could go, I mean, an interesting example would be the Facebook group on prostate cancer, which I actually think is quite good. And I think that the patients on that are very generous toward other patients, and overall the attitudes are very good, but there's no expertise. And so you're really just sort of awash in a sea of opinions and perspectives without any real expertise being brought to bear.
Yeah. No, I mean we do have brilliant moderators, caring moderators,
No,
and
absolutely.
I mean, as you just described, it expresses itself in people getting good care from each
Yeah.
other and providing good care to others. Um, you are in a unique position. You have been editor of a peer-reviewed journal on health policy in the United
Yes.
States. Well, talk a bit for those who don't know about what peer review means, what that process is, and how patients might use the information from those journals.
Well, a peer-reviewed journal is one that makes an initial cut as to what they think is in their wheelhouse and what isn't, but then takes the ones that they think are relevant and potentially worthy of publication and sends those pieces out to experts in the field. So at my journal, which was Health Affairs, we had a very, very large stable, or you might even call it a constellation of reviewers on different topics. And if I got a paper on prostate cancer, for instance, I would turn to my people who have reviewed for me in the past and have been good reviewers, or people who haven't, but who, based on my research, pop up as being people with expertise in the field and whose perspectives we would like to hear. And so at Health Affairs, we sent articles out to anywhere between two and four reviewers. And one of the miracles of peer review, which really delighted me when I first joined the journal, was the depth and the quality of the reviews that we received. And these are medical or policy experts and professionals who are taking hours out of their day to make very fine-grained remarks and criticisms about what they're reading. Checking the references to make sure that the references are valid and appropriate. And so this information comes back to the editors of the journal, who then digest what the reviewers have said and make a determination as to whether we should proceed further with the paper through editing or revision or reject it. And at our journal, I would say, well, definitely less than 10% of the articles submitted to us were published in the end. I think it was more like 6 or 7%.
Do you think that's a valid comparison for like Lancet or Nature?
I
Or,
do. I do. For journals of that caliber, I do. I don't know what their numbers are, but it's probably in that ballpark.
yeah,
Probably maybe even lower. I'm not
yeah.
sure. The New England Journal, Lancet, JAMA, a few of the others in that
Now,
echelon.
now, why are reviewers mostly anonymous?
Yeah, well, in our world that there's double blinding, so the reviewers are anonymous to the author, and the author is anonymous to the reviewers. So we don't want the reviewers going into an article with any biases about the author. Oh, they don't like them, or they got they wrote a paper 5 years ago that I hated, that sort of thing. We want them to just go in and review the paper as a paper with no other identification of the paper or where it came from. And then the same really holds for the author. We don't want the author, we want the author to read the reviews without bringing in any of their own biases as to how worthy the reviewer is.
Oh, I'm so sad to say. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
We,
We
we
don't we don't
frozen
want
again.
the we don't want the
If you would, when you unfreeze again, talk about how you don't want the authors to know about the identity of the
yeah.
research of
Yeah. So
the
we
reviews.
also don't want the authors to know the identity of the reviewers, because if they did, they might, if they had a bias against the reviewer or even a bias in favor of the reviewer, it might influence how they read and how they digest the critique that is offered by that reviewer.
Yeah. And there's the sense that patients don't are not capable of understanding articles in peer-reviewed journals. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's a problem because the articles, many of these articles are very complex, and they're written on a level that's above that of the average reviewer. At Health Affairs, we really spoke to two audiences. One was audience of experts, and the other was an audience of policymakers and just regular interested readers. So as an editor, my job was to make every article readable. But many other journals whose audience was really an expert audience, they don't really see the need to do that. So I think that's where responsible media really comes into play, that the reporters really need, who write about articles of that nature, need to be sophisticated enough to understand what they're reading, and with regard to what and know what they don't understand, and to ask questions about what they don't understand, to not assume anything, not assume knowledge, to really make sure that they understand everything from the source, and that they also get outside opinions and perspectives on it. But
So,
it is difficult for an average reader to just go into a technical journal and bring out much meaning from it.
yeah, as you see journal articles discussed on Mailcare's community, do you think that people are understanding things or just blabbing away?
A little bit of both, or maybe a lot of both. And I think that's where you come in, and the other moderators, is to um, set people straight and to sort of represent what the state of knowledge is, or what the flaws or the downsides might be in a particular study or article.
Very good. Tell us, as we're winding this talk down to a close, tell us more about your feelings today about how you trust all of your healthcare providers, dentists,
Oh,
podiatrists, what
wow.
have you. Yeah.
To be honest, these days I don't have as nearly as much trust as I wish I had. And it's not that I don't trust them because I think they're bad, excuse me, they're bad people. I don't trust many of them because I don't think they really take the time to get on top of your condition, to think about what's going on to you, to sort of echo what I said before about reporters, to know what they know, but also to know what they don't know, and to find answers to what they don't know. And one thing I found in healthcare more generally, and primary care and also specialty medicine, is that they're so pressed for time that they want to get you in and out of the office in 15 minutes. And the result of that is that they often make snap decisions about you, or they just sort of hand you off to the next person. Or they say, well, I'll see you again it's June, I'll see you again in October. And I've had a lot of negative experiences in healthcare outside of prostate cancer on other fronts, involving doctors and other health professionals who just don't take the time, and also who just don't seem to be thinking. They just sort of go down a checklist of tests to order, and if something pops up, then they prescribe a drug for that, and if nothing does, then they say, well, I don't know, and maybe you should see a neurologist or a orthopedist or somebody else. So I do a lot of my own research. I get a lot of second opinions. I write to my doctors through the patient portal, asking questions. That can be a pretty difficult patient, a time-consuming patient because of all that. But I see a lot of fragmentation in the healthcare system and a lack of care coordination. And I think that patients too often are just freelancing. They're just figuring out who to see next and what to ask and where to go. And it's just sort of an endless journey for many people. But I will say, I think the prostate cancer program at Hopkins was well coordinated. It wasn't perfect, but it was well coordinated. And I had actually a nurse practitioner there who made sure that I had the right appointments and that I saw the people I needed to. And for the most part, if I had a problem, she would address it, either on her own or by bringing in an oncologist or a radiation oncologist or somebody else.
Yeah. And your care is still being managed there?
It is, except real quickly, my PSA has been stable despite having this highly aggressive cancer. It's been pretty stable. And so I am now about 5 years out, between 5 and 6 years out from diagnosis. I will have my next PSA tested in December. And if that, and I directly after which I will have an appointment with a nurse practitioner. And if my PSA is stable again, she's going to discharge me from their care. And I will go back to primary care, who will basically just make sure I get my PSA tested. And then if there's an elevation, I'll go back to Hopkins, but I will graduate from radiation oncology to medical oncology.
Mhm.
Because at that point, there won't be a role for radiation. I'll have to think about medical remedies.
Yeah. Well, there'll always be a place for you at Malecare. I mean, Mailcare's been around since 1998. I imagine it'll be there when after I'm dead,
Yeah,
perhaps. Yeah. So, I mean, the only hope is that there won't be a need for it by then, but, we'll see. I'm grateful for today's talk. I hope people got some benefit out of it.
thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.